What if the forest is not empty? What if some places on Earth are not simply remote, but thin, thin between worlds? A place where space folds, where directions repeat, where something vast and unseen threads itself through reality, like roots through soil. This is the story of a guide who stepped into the wrong place and learned that the world is not singular, it is layered. And sometimes the layers touch. The district police station of the settlement Verkhney Rushi was housed in a two-story building of gray brick, constructed back in the Soviet years. A winter morning filtered through the narrow windows with a dull, colorless light, leaving the corners of the offices in half shadow. The corridors smelled of dust, damp wool coats, and the metallic warmth of radiators. That particular scent of institutions where time moves slowly and always the same. Senior investigator Victor Gorin sat at his desk, slowly rereading the interrogation report written the night before by his young assistant. The paper rustled softly, dry, brittle, like snow beneath heavy boots. The file read, Daniel Sokolov, forest ranger, brought in a state of shock, found deep in the taiga, far from any road, alone, no backpack, no supplies, his hands and face torn raw, as if he had pushed straight through the forest, blindly, without knowing where he was going, or why. When the search team found Daniel, he was sitting at the base of a cedar tree, staring at a single point. He didn't respond to voices, didn't answer when they called his name. His clothes hung in tatters. His boots were worn through to holes. A ragged tear gaped along the side of his jacket, as if the fabric had been caught on something sharp, pulled, and pulled again until it finally gave way. Daniel Sokolov was not drunk. The tests were clean. He wasn't under the influence of drugs. Doctors diagnosed severe exhaustion, dehydration, and extreme nervous strain. Yet physically, he was strangely intact. His heart beat steadily. His blood pressure was normal. No fractures were found, only the eyes. There was something alien in them, the same look Victor Gorin had seen in soldiers when he was a child. Eyes that were empty, and yet unbearably full. Full of something that should never fit inside a human being. Only the eyes. There was something alien in them. Victor Gorin set the papers aside and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Years of service had taught him to tell the difference between ordinary mental collapse and something far more complex. He stood up, took the case file, and headed for the interrogation room. The corridor of the district station stretched long and narrow. From a nearby office came the clatter of a typewriter. The duty clerk preparing yet another report. Somewhere downstairs a door slammed. Voices followed. A short burst of laughter. An ordinary day in an ordinary district station of a remote Siberian settlement. And yet the folder in Victor Gorin's hand felt heavy. Heavy like someone else's secret. He pushed the door open. Seated at the table was Daniel Sokolov. His hair was tangled, matted. Stubble covered his hollow cheeks. Dark circles lay heavy beneath his eyes. His hands rested motionless on the tabletop, yet his fingers trembled faintly, as if weak currents were still running through them. His gaze was fixed on the wall, as though the ranger saw something there that no one else could. Abrasions marked his wrists, too even for an accident, too meaningless for rope, marks left by something that restrains, without knots and without reason. Daniel Sokolov, Gromov began, sitting down across from him. Are you ready to continue our conversation? Daniel slowly shifted his gaze toward the investigator. Something flickered in his eyes, something like recognition, like a return to the present moment. He blinked several times, licked his cracked lips. I'm ready, he said quietly. His voice was hoarse, as if he had been screaming for a long time, or not speaking at all. But you won't believe me. No one ever does, Gromov said, opening the folder. Tell it anyway. I'll decide whether to believe you or not. Daniel nodded, ran a hand down his face, gathering his thoughts. All right, Daniel breathed. Listen. Victor Gorin took out a clean sheet of paper and prepared to write. The recorder was already running, capturing every word, every pause, every unnecessary breath. Start from the beginning, he said. When did you meet the missing tourists? Daniel leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier, as if inside the memory he had found something solid to stand on. They arrived in the village that morning, on a bus from the city. They stayed with Semyonovna at the local hotel. Two of them, a man and a woman, husband and wife, Mark and Maria. They didn't give a last name. I didn't ask. City people. You could tell right away. New clothes, careful movements, and that look in their eyes. Curiosity, mixed with fear. He paused, as if he could see them again on the porch. Mark, lively and confident, wearing a bright, expensive jacket. And Maria, slender, watchful, with a backpack that still smelled of the store. Semyonovna had called ahead, said they were looking for a guide into the taiga. I came over. We talked. Mark explained they had a project, documenting abandoned places, a camera, a tripod, a drone. Maria mostly stayed quiet. She kept writing something down in a notebook. Where were they heading? Victor Gorin asked without lifting his head. Daniel opened his eyes. Dead Spring. Victor Gorin felt something shift inside him, barely perceptible, as if the word had caught on an old, half-forgotten unease. Dead Spring, he repeated. And what do you know about that place? Daniel looked away. People don't talk about it much. The old ones remember, and then fall silent. Immediately, I'd heard the stories. They said that before the village was abandoned, people started disappearing. Livestock went wild, ran off into the forest, never came back. Children talked about voices, calling them, asking them to come out and play. And one woman, she swore she saw something above the village, something enormous, glowing. They said she'd lost her mind. They took her away. She never returned. Do you believe these stories? Victor Gorin asked, watching Daniel closely. Daniel looked back at the investigator. I didn't. Not at first. I thought they were just stories for tourists, drunk old men talking nonsense. Dead Spring was just another abandoned place. There are dozens like it in the taiga. Forestry doesn't even keep track of them anymore. They're listed as non-residential, empty land. But Mark and Maria offered good money, and the route looked simple. 2 days in, along a familiar trail. 1 day on site, filming, documenting. 2 days back. I thought it was easy money. I was wrong. The investigator nodded, continuing to write. The investigator nodded, continuing to write. We agreed to leave at dawn on the 5th. I made a list, equipment, supplies. Mark bought everything. No haggling, no questions. He clearly had money. Maria stayed quiet again. But I noticed how she kept asking the same questions. About the safety of the route, about communication, about how fast we could turn back. If something went wrong, I reassured her. Told her I'd been walking these forests since childhood, that I knew this land like the back of my hand. She nodded, but the worry never left her eyes. On the evening of the 4th, I packed my backpack, a tent, sleeping bags, a small stove, a pot, food for 5 days, with extra just in case, a first aid kit, a compass, a map, a knife, an axe, rope, flashlights with spare batteries, matches sealed in waterproof wrapping, everything on the list, nothing missing. I checked it twice, and I studied the map the most. An old Soviet one, the kind with faded lines and stubborn certainty, where Dead Spring was still marked. The trail ran through a clearing, then into a burned-over forest, a long, blackened burn scar, and then through dense cedar taiga, before reaching the site of the former village. The distance was about 25 kilometers in a straight line, but with the terrain, the twists and loops of the trail, it came closer to 35. 2 days of travel at a steady pace, with stops for rest and an overnight camp. I went to bed early, but sleep wouldn't come. What little sleep I did find came in fragments: broken images, forest, snow, voices, indistinct, calling from somewhere beyond sight. I woke again and again, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. Outside, the wind began to howl. Shutters creaked and groaned. Ordinary sounds, familiar ones. But that night, they felt different, ominous, like a warning. On the morning of the 5th, I woke before dawn. I dressed in silence, checked my gear once more. Then I stepped outside into complete darkness. Only far to the east, the sky was just beginning to pale. The village streets were empty. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and from a single window, a light was still burning. I reached the hotel. Mark and Maria were already waiting on the porch, backpacks on their shoulders. Mark looked energetic, smiling, rubbing his hands together, warming up. Maria stood a little apart, pale, silent, her hood pulled low over her face. I greeted them, checked their gear. Mark's pack was loaded properly, good balance, weight distributed the right way. Maria's was a bit bottom-heavy. I rearranged a few things, showed her how to carry it correctly. She nodded and thanked me. Quietly, we set off, walked through the village toward its edge, where the clearing began. The sky was growing brighter, turning pale and then pink. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the horizon was already burning orange. The air was completely still. The silence, absolute. Only our footsteps. Maria looked back, at the village, at the lit windows, at the smoke rising from chimneys. She looked for a long moment, as if committing it to memory. Then she turned away and walked on. The clearing stretched straight ahead, wide, covered with fresh snow. Along the edges stood young birch and aspen trees, thin, bare, their black branches stark against the white. Walking was easy. Mark walked just behind me. He talked about his project, about how many abandoned places he and Maria had already documented. He spoke with energy, listing names, villages, settlements, factories, churches. Maria walked last, silent. From time to time, I glanced back, checking that she wasn't falling behind. She kept pace. Her breathing was still steady. For now, about an hour later, we reached the burn scar, a place where a wildfire had passed 5 years earlier. It had devoured entire hectares of forest. All that remained were charred trunks, blackened and hollow, rising from the ground like dark spears. Between them, new growth struggled through. Willow, alder, young birch, thin and fragile, reclaiming the ashes. The snow here was loose, uneven. Walking became harder. Mark broke the trail. I followed his footprints. Maria came after me, one step at a time. We stopped at the edge of the burn scar, beside a lone larch tree. A survivor, somehow spared by the fire. I built a small fire, melted snow in the kettle, brewed tea, opened canned meat, bread, salted fat. We ate in silence, warming our hands by the flames. Mark took out his camera, shot a few frames. The charred forest, us by the fire, Maria staring into the flames, lost in thought. "How much farther?" Maria asked. Her voice was quiet but tight. "By evening, we'll reach the cedar forest," I said. "We'll camp there. In the morning, we'll go on to Dead Key." She nodded, turned away. Mark gave her shoulder a gentle pat, whispered something I couldn't hear. She smiled, faintly, uncertain. We put out the fire, covered the embers with snow, and moved on. The burn scar ended, and the cedar forest began. The forest changed immediately. It became dense, dark, ancient. The cedars were massive, their trunks too thick to wrap your arms around. High above, their crowns closed together, letting only scraps of light through. Here the snow lay untouched, a smooth, even layer, soft and powdery. Only hair tracks crossed it, thin chains of prints weaving through the white. Somewhere in the distance, a flash of red slipped between the trees. A fox, most likely. The trail through the cedar forest was old, overgrown, but still visible. I followed the markings on the trees, cuts made 20, maybe 30 years ago, back when geologists and hunters still moved through here. The marks had darkened with time, sealed over with resin, but I recognized them easily. 3 slanted lines, deep, angled, a standard hunter's mark. That's when something strange began. I saw the mark on a cedar tree and memorized it. 3 slanted lines sealed over with resin. I walked on about 200 meters and saw it again. On another tree, exactly the same. 3 slanted lines, the same angle, the same depth, the same hardened resin. I stopped, stepped closer, looked carefully. The mark was old, but it looked copied. I walked another 100 meters. There it was again, and then again, and again. I stopped, called Mark over, showed him the mark. "Look," I said, "it's the same cut repeating. You see it?" Mark shrugged. "So what? Hunters mark trees the same way. It's practical." "No," I said, shaking my head. "Every hunter has his own hand, his own way. Some cut deep, some barely mark the bark, some strike at a sharp angle, some at a dull one. But this was a perfect copy, 1 to 1. Maybe it was the same person," Mark suggested. I didn't answer. I took out the compass, checked our heading. The needle pointed north, steady, without the slightest tremble. The sun hung low on the horizon, off to our left. That meant we were moving east, correctly. But the markings kept repeating, as if the forest had begun looping in on itself. "Let's keep going," I said, hiding my unease. We walked on. The marks appeared at nearly equal intervals, every 100, maybe 150 meters. I started counting. 10 identical marks, 15, 20. I kept looking back, checking our footprints. They stretched behind us in a clean, straight line. No loops, no crossings. We were walking straight, and yet, the marks. Mark noticed my unease. "Something wrong?" he asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe my memory's playing tricks on me. I haven't been here in a long time." Maria walked on in silence, but I could see it. She'd tensed up too, looking around more often, listening. Then the sounds began. First, a branch snapped ahead of us, about 30 meters away. Sharp, loud, like someone stepping on a dry limb. I stopped, raised my hand, the signal to freeze. I listened. Nothing but our breathing, and somewhere far off, the dull knock of a woodpecker. We moved on. A minute later, another crack, this time to the left, then to the right, then behind us. I turned around. Mark and Maria were standing still, looking at me, questioning, waiting. They hadn't broken anything. The snow beneath their boots creaked evenly, steady, familiar. But the cracking continued, as if someone was walking around us in circles, snapping branches on purpose, making sure we knew they were there. "Do you hear that?" Mark asked quietly. "I hear it," I nodded. "What is it? A bear?" "A bear," I said. "In December, bears are hibernating." "An elk." "An elk moves differently," I said. "Heavy. Branches bend. Snow falls away." But this sound was light, precise. Like, I didn't finish the thought. Like a person, a barefoot person. That's how it sounds when bare feet step on dry branches. But who would walk barefoot on snow in 20-degree frost? We moved on. The cracking didn't stop. It came from different directions, without pattern, without logic, sometimes ahead of us, sometimes behind, sometimes at the same time, to the left and to the right. Mark took out his camera, tried to record the sound. The moment he started recording, the cracking stopped. He turned it off. The sound returned. Forest acoustics, Mark said, uncertain. An echo, reflection. I said nothing. That's not how echoes work. An echo repeats a sound. It doesn't create a new one. Darkness came early. The sun dropped fast, the way it always does in the taiga in winter. Daylight faded into dusk, then into a deep, heavy blue. The temperature fell again. Another 5 degrees at least. I decided to set up camp before full darkness took hold. We found a relatively level spot between two massive cedars, cleared the snow down to bare ground, laid down branches for insulation, pitched the tent. Mark helped. Maria sat on her backpack, watching the forest grow darker. I built the fire, gathered dead wood, snapped dry branches, peeled birch bark from a fallen tree. The forest closed in around us. The fire caught quickly, hot, hungry. We sat around it, warming ourselves, making dinner. I boiled water, brewed tea, passed the mugs around. Maria held hers with both hands, warming her palms, drinking in small, careful sips. Mark chewed canned meat with bread, trying to joke, but the jokes came out stiff, unconvincing. The forest around us stood silent, too silent. No wind, no rustling branches, no birds, only the crackle of the fire and our breathing. I listened, straining my ears, but heard nothing. A hollow silence as if we were sitting inside a bell, cut off from the rest of the world. And then I heard a voice, my own voice, calling my name. Daniel! It came from the darkness, to my right. I flinched, turned around. Nothing but darkness. The fire lit only a narrow circle around us. Beyond it, solid black. I almost answered, but then I saw Mark staring at me, confused. What? He asked. What's wrong? Didn't you hear that? I said. Someone called me. Mark and Maria glanced at each other, then shook their heads. No one called, Maria said. We fell silent, but I heard it clearly. My voice, my name, coming from the dark. I'll check, Mark said, standing up. He took the flashlight, switched it on. The beam cut through tree trunks, snow, shadows twisting between the cedars. He circled the camp, 20 meters out, sweeping the light in every direction. Then he came back, shook his head. No one, no tracks, probably acoustics or exhaustion. The mind playing tricks. But the forest didn't feel like a trick. I nodded, but I didn't believe him. The voice was real. I wasn't hallucinating. We agreed to take turns keeping watch. I took the first shift, from 9 o'clock to midnight. Mark and Maria climbed into the tent, settled into their sleeping bags. A few minutes later, I heard their breathing, slow even. They were asleep. I stayed by the fire, fed it with wood, watched the flames. The fire danced, throwing restless shadows onto the tree trunks. The shadows were long, broken. They moved as if they were alive. I stared at them and thought about the markings, about the snapped branches, about the voice. I tried to find an explanation. Something rational, something logical. I couldn't. Time dragged. I checked my watch. 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11. The forest was silent. The fire crackled. Cold crept in from behind, despite the heat. I pulled my jacket tighter, rolled my shoulders, rubbed my fingers to keep them warm. At 11:30, I heard footsteps, soft, careful, moving over the snow. Someone was walking around the camp. I froze, listened. The steps moved in a circle, slow, measured. I turned my head, trying to locate them. To the right? No. To the left? No. Everywhere at once. I grabbed the flashlight, switched it on, aimed it into the darkness. The beam cut through the night. Trees, snow, nothing. The footsteps continued. I stood up, walked the perimeter of the camp, sweeping the light around. The snow was untouched, only our daytime tracks. No new footprints. I returned to the fire, sat down. The footsteps stopped. At midnight, I woke Mark. He crawled out of the tent, yawning, sat down by the fire. I told him about the footsteps. He frowned, but said nothing. I crawled back into the tent, lay down beside Maria, slipped into my sleeping bag. I tried to sleep. Sleep wouldn't come. I lay there with my eyes open, listening to the crackle of the fire outside, to Maria's breathing beside me, to the silence of the forest. I dozed off only briefly, just before dawn. Fragments of dreams, trees, the markings, faceless shapes, voices calling me. I woke to Mark shaking my shoulder. His face was pale, tense. "Daniel, look at this," he said quietly. I climbed out of the tent. Dawn was only beginning. The sky in the east had turned gray-violet. The stars were fading. The morning cold was sharp, cutting straight through. Mark pointed to the snow around the camp. I saw the footprints, bare, human. They circled the tent. Dozens of prints, as if someone had walked barefoot through the snow all night. The impressions were clear, fresh, toes distinct, the arches of the feet visible, adult size, an average man. The depth of the prints, normal, as if the person weighed around 80 kilos. But the tracks ended a few meters from the fire. They didn't lead away into the forest. They simply appeared out of nowhere, in the middle of the snow, and vanished the same way, as if someone had materialized, walked the circle, and disappeared. Maria stepped out of the tent. She saw the footprints and went pale. She pressed a hand to her mouth, took a step back. "Who is this?" she whispered. "Who was walking around us?" I crouched down, studied the impressions carefully. The tracks formed two concentric circles around the camp. The outer circle, about 10 meters from the tent. The inner one, about 5. The footprints didn't cross, didn't overlap. The stride was even, identical. Whoever it was walked calmly. No hurry, no hesitation. "Who would walk barefoot in the snow?" Mark asked. "In 20-degree frost? Your feet would freeze in minutes." I didn't answer, because I didn't have one. "We have to leave," Maria said quietly. "Go back to the village. Now." Mark objected. "Dead Key is close. We've already covered most of the distance. Turning back now is stupid. We'll lose time. And money." Maria looked at him, fear and anger in her eyes. "What money?" she said. "Can't you see what's happening? This isn't normal." Mark hesitated. "I don't know. A prank, maybe, or some kind of animal." "An animal," Maria said softly. "With human feet?" They argued. The forest listened. I stared at the footprints and thought. Part of me wanted to listen to Maria, turn around, go back. But another part, the professional part, the ranger, said it was too early to panic. Maybe it really was a prank. Maybe someone local had decided to scare the tourists. Though how he knew where we were, how he walked barefoot through the snow, and how he left no tracks coming in or out, I couldn't explain. "We go on," I said, making the decision. "The village is 3 hours ahead. We'll see what's there. If we notice anything else strange." We turned back immediately. Maria wanted to argue, but Mark had already nodded. Agreed. She gave in. Her shoulders dropped. "All right," she said quietly. "But at the first sign of danger, we leave. Promise me." We promised. It was a stupid decision, the stupidest one of my life. We broke camp quickly, in silence, folded the tent, packed the sleeping bags, shouldered our packs. I put out the fire, poured water over it, covered it with snow, ground the embers down. Maria stood off to the side, unable to take her eyes off the footprints. Mark checked his camera, took a few shots of the tracks. For documentation, the forest waited. We moved on. The compass pointed east. The sun was rising to our left, low over the horizon, weak, dim. Light fell in slanted beams through the cedar crowns, laying long stripes of light and shadow across the snow. I walked in front, watching my footing, the trail, the markings. The marks were still repeating, but I'd stopped counting them. About an hour later, I noticed something else. The shadows. The shadows were wrong. The sun was on our left. That meant the shadows should fall to the right, at a clean angle, parallel to our movement. But some shadows stretched straight ahead. Some fell backward. Some pointed left, toward the sun itself. That was physically impossible. There was only one light source, the sun. Shadows should be parallel, all pointing the same way. I stopped, looked carefully. The shadow of a cedar to my left fell forward, and slightly to the right. The shadow of a cedar on my right fell backward, and to the left. I stepped closer, checked again. The shadows wavered, as if the light source were moving, even though the sun hung motionless in the sky. "What now?" Mark asked, stepping closer. I pointed at the ground. "At the shadows, look. They're falling in different directions." Mark studied them, shrugged. "So what? The sun's low. The light hits at an angle. Maybe the terrain's affecting it." "Terrain doesn't affect direction," I said. "Only length." "Then I don't know," Mark waved it off. "An optical illusion." Maria said nothing, but her face was tight, lips pressed together. We kept moving. The shadows kept misbehaving. I tried not to look, but it was impossible. Each shadow seemed alive, moving independently of what cast it. Sometimes a shadow reached the snow before I got there, stretching ahead of its tree. Sometimes it lagged behind, appearing with a delay, as if the forest had fallen out of sync with itself. Another half hour passed, and we reached a stream, small, narrow, almost completely frozen. The ice was thick, clear enough to see through. Beneath it the water moved, dark, slow. Only in the center was there a narrow opening where the current ran stronger. I knew this stream. I'd passed it before, about 10 years ago. It flows from north to south, emptying into the Taiga River. We were supposed to cross it and continue east, but the water was moving the other way, from south to north. I stopped at the bank, stared at the water. It flowed slowly, but unmistakably, in the wrong direction. I took out the compass, checked it. North was correct. I looked at the sun. It was on our left, exactly where it should be in the morning, when moving east. Everything was right, except the stream. It was flowing backward. "You're mistaken," Mark said when I told him. "We must have come at it from the other side. Memory plays tricks." "No," I shook my head. "I'm not mistaken. This stream used to flow from the north. Now it's flowing from the south." "Maybe it's a different stream," Maria suggested. "There's only one stream within 10 kilometers, I said. "There aren't any others on the map." We stood on the bank, watching the water. Mark took out his camera, filmed the opening in the ice, the current. Then he put the camera away. "Let's go," he said. "We'll figure it out later." We crossed the stream on the ice. It creaked beneath our boots, but held. The water in the opening was black, opaque. I didn't look into it. I hurried to the far bank. Beyond the stream, the forest began to change. The cedars started to thin out. Gaps appeared between them. The trunks grew slimmer, the crowns lower. There was less snow. In places, dark, damp ground showed through. Last year's leaves pressed into the soil. The temperature rose. I felt it immediately. Instead of 25 below, it was closer to 15, maybe even 10. The air turned heavy, damp. and there was a smell, sweet, rotting, like something organic decomposing somewhere nearby. Mark unzipped his jacket, wiped his forehead. "It's warmer," he said. "Probably a microclimate, a sheltered valley or something like that." I said nothing. We were heading east toward the mountains. It's always colder there, never warmer. Sheltered valleys exist, yes, but not enough to cause a 15-degree difference over a distance of a few hundred meters. The trail began to twist more sharply now, winding around bushes, large stones, fallen trees. I tried to keep our heading with the compass, but the needle began to twitch. At first, barely noticeable, then stronger. It pointed north, then drifted slightly, then returned, then drifted again. I tapped the casing. No change. I pulled a spare compass from my pack. It behaved the same way. The needle jumping, quivering between markings. "Magnetic anomaly," I said to Mark. "Probably ore in the ground. Iron deposits. Happens in the mountains." He nodded, reassured. But I knew better. There are no anomalies here. I'd been through these places before. The compasses had always worked just fine. We kept walking. The forest grew thinner. Thinner still. Bushes gave way to small clearings. Clearings to open patches. The ground beneath our feet became strange. Not snow, not earth. Something in between. Soft, yielding, slightly springy. I crouched down, touched it. It felt like moss, but the color was wrong. Gray-green with a faint violet tint. Maria walked in silence, pale, watching the ground carefully. Mark kept turning around, filming, but his movements were sharp now. Nervous. Then the air changed. A faint mist began to gather ahead. Not thick, not rolling in. It simply formed, a pale, milky haze settling low over the clearing. It did not move with the wind. It seemed to condense out of nothing. The mist pooled between the sparse trees, hung close to the ground, blurring the distance. And through that haze, a line appeared, dark, horizontal, too straight to be natural. I stopped. The mist thinned in places, and wooden planks emerged from it. A leaning fence, weathered and blackened. Behind it, a roof began to take shape, not rising, revealing itself. Its ridge sagged inward, boards dark with age. Another roof resolved beside it, then another. The fog did not clear all at once. It withdrew slowly, as if uncovering something that had been there the entire time. We had reached the edge of a clearing, and beyond it, about 50 meters away, stood a village, Dead Spring. It hadn't risen. It hadn't approached. It had simply been concealed. Maria quickened her pace. Mark followed her. I stayed at the edge for a moment, staring at the village. Inside me, everything tightened. Instinct screamed, "Turn around, leave, run." But I didn't. I followed them. Dead Spring looked exactly as I had expected. A typical abandoned Siberian village. The houses stood in 2 rows along a single street. Log cabins, old, built from darkened timber, roofs sagging inward, windows broken, doors crooked, hanging from a single hinge. Between the houses grew birch and aspen, young trees, 30, maybe 40 years old, about as long as the village had stood empty. There was almost no snow on the street, only small drifts gathered along the walls. The ground showed through in black patches, wet, dark, as if it had rained recently, though it hadn't. But something was wrong. I couldn't tell what at first. The village looked ordinary. I had seen dozens like it. And yet, with every step, the feeling of unease grew. It rose into my throat, pressed against my chest. The air here was thicker, heavier. It smelled of dampness, rot, and something else. Sweet, sickening. There were no sounds, none. No wind, no creaking boards, no rustling. Only our footsteps, dull, muted, as if the village were absorbing the noise. Mark stepped up to the first house, looked through the window, and called us over. I joined him, peered inside. The cabin was small, one room. In the corner stood a stove, cold, its door hanging open. By the window, a table. On it sat a bowl, something dark inside, covered in mold. Beside it, a fallen chair, a broken mug, shards scattered across the floor. Against the opposite wall, an iron bed with rusted bars. A blanket lay crumpled on top. On the floor, rags, old shoes, personal belongings left where they'd fallen. Everything covered in a thick layer of dust, cobwebs in the corners, but arranged in such a way that it felt less like decay and more like people had walked out in the middle of an ordinary day, leaving everything as it was. Scary, Maria whispered. Just a normal abandoned place, Mark said, but his voice trembled. Don't be afraid. We moved farther down the street. The houses repeated the same story. Half-eaten food left on tables, furniture overturned, clothes and tools abandoned mid-use. In one cabin, I saw children's toys, a wooden horse on small wheels, a rag doll with one arm torn off. In another, an old treadle sewing machine. Beside it, a piece of fabric with a seam left unfinished. Everything frozen in a single moment, as if time had stopped. At the center of the village stood a large building, 2 stories tall, brick, once covered in yellow plaster, now peeling, flaking away in patches. The roof had partially collapsed. Beams jutted outward like broken ribs. The windows were empty, black openings, but the walls still held. The building stood firm. Mark suggested we take a look inside. Maybe we'll find something, he said. Documents, records, something that explains what happened. Maria shook her head. I'm not going in there. What? Mark said. You'll stay here alone? She looked around the village, at the empty houses, the stillness, the silence. Then she nodded uncertain. Fine, I'll go. The 3 of us walked toward the building. The front door was slightly ajar, hanging from a single hinge. I pushed it. It gave a long, drawn-out creak and swung wider. Inside, darkness. The smell hit first. Mold, rot, damp plaster. Mark took out a flashlight, switched it on. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing a corridor. Long, narrow doors on both sides. The floor was covered in debris, papers, shards of glass, splintered boards, chunks of plaster, pieces of fallen ceiling. On the walls hung posters, faded, torn, young pioneers with red scarves, slogans about a bright future, portraits of leaders, all from the 70s, the 80s. We stepped inside carefully. The floor bent under our weight, creaked. I walked first. Mark followed, sweeping the light. Maria came last, holding onto the sleeve of my jacket. The first room on the right was empty, bare walls, a hole in the ceiling through which gray sky showed. The second room, empty as well. The third, there were desks, chairs, a blackboard on the wall, a classroom. On the desks lay notebooks, open, filled with old handwriting in a child's hand. I picked one up, turned the pages. Arithmetic, problems solved neatly, a Russian dictation exercise, a pencil drawing, a house, a tree, a sun, an ordinary child's notebook. But in the far corner of the classroom, something was wrong. At first I thought it was just a stain on the floor. Then I saw the shape, a circle, wide, too deliberate, almost a meter across, drawn in chalk. The lines were pale, old, yet impossibly sharp, as if someone had redrawn them recently, using the same faded chalk. Inside the circle were symbols, angular, jagged, not letters, not any alphabet I knew. They looked less written and more pressed into place, as though the floor itself had yielded to them. The air in the room felt heavier there, denser. In the center of the circle lay a stone, gray, rough, about the size of a fist, its surface uneven, almost fleshy in places, like cooled lava or scarred bone, and carved into it the same symbols, not scratched, carved, deep, violent, as if someone had hammered them in with metal, again and again, until the stone remembered. Mark stepped closer, too close. He crouched, brought the flashlight down. The beam hit the chalk. The symbols seemed to swallow the light. "What is that?" he asked. His voice didn't echo. It simply stopped in the air. "I don't know," I said. My throat felt dry. "Some kind of ritual, maybe." Maria leaned over my shoulder. The moment she saw it, she recoiled, as if the floor had moved. "We're leaving," she said sharply. "Now." But Mark had already reached inside the circle, already picked up the stone. He turned it slowly in his hands. The symbols caught the light, and for a second I could swear they shifted. "Interesting," he murmured. "Looks like shamanic markings, local belief system." I wanted to tell him, "Put it down, don't touch it," but I didn't get the chance, because at that exact moment, we heard something, not from the hallway, not from outside, from somewhere inside the building. A sound, slow, deliberate, and moving toward us. The footsteps began in the corridor outside, slow, heavy, not hurried, not searching, certain. Someone was walking toward us. Measured steps, even, deliberate, each one landing with a weight that seemed too great for the decaying floor to bear. We froze. Mark snapped off the flashlight. Darkness collapsed over us instantly. Thick, physical, suffocating. It didn't just remove the light, it pressed inward. I could see nothing, only the sound. The footsteps drew closer. Floorboards groaned beneath them. Something dragged along the corridor floor. A scraping, metal against wood, like a chain being pulled, or something heavier. Maria's breathing turned ragged beside me, shallow, shaking. The steps stopped. Right outside the classroom door. Silence, total, absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat hammering in my skull. So loud I was sure whatever stood outside could hear it too. Maria's fingers dug into my arm. She was trembling. Mark stood motionless. The stone was still in his hand. Seconds stretched, warped, each one distended into something unbearable. I stared at the doorway, at the rectangle of deeper black inside the blackness. And then the door began to open, slowly, without a sound. No creak, no hinge, as if something invisible were pushing it from the other side. The movement was smooth, controlled. The door widened inch by inch. A thin gray light from the corridor seeped into the room, and in that light, a shape, tall, humanoid, but wrong. The proportions were displaced. Arms too long, hanging nearly to its knees. Legs thin, unnaturally thin. Its head tilted at an angle that made my stomach twist, as if the neck had been broken and never corrected. It stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, not breathing, not blinking. I couldn't see a face, only a silhouette, black against gray, and somehow it felt like it was smiling. Then the figure stepped into the classroom, slowly, carefully, not like a person entering a room, like something testing whether the air would hold it. One step. The floor did not creak beneath it. Its long arm extended forward. The hand opened, fingers spread wide. Too many joints. Too long, bone thin. The nails were narrow and sharp, curved slightly inward, like they had never been cut, only worn against something harder than wood. I remember the fingers. That is what I remember most. Mark's hand jerked. The flashlight snapped on. The beam struck the figure. Empty doorway, dust, peeling paint. A corridor filled with debris and gray light. Nothing standing there. Nothing moving. Mark swept the beam across the room. Corners, ceiling, the chalk circle, the door frame. Nothing. He stepped into the corridor. Right, left, empty. I saw it, Maria whispered. Her voice sounded far away. He was here. He walked toward us. I saw it too, Mark said. His voice trembled despite the words. I nodded. So did I. Clear, sharp. It had not been imagination. It had taken space. It had displaced air. Go, I said. Now, fast! We rushed out into the corridor, nearly running, boots slipping on loose papers and plaster. Mark held the flashlight ahead of us. The beam jumped wildly across the walls. Faded posters, open doorways, long shadows stretching and snapping back. The corridor felt wrong. Longer than before. Much longer. Doors passed on both sides. Too many doors. I counted without meaning to. 10, 12, 15, 20. They kept coming. The hallway did not end. Mark stopped suddenly, turned around. His face was wet with sweat. We're lost, he breathed. How could we be lost? It's one corridor, straight. But it wasn't straight anymore. The walls seemed slightly bowed, the perspective wrong, the ceiling farther away than it should have been, and somewhere far behind us, a soft, careful step echoed again. Not close, not far. Just enough to remind us. It was still inside the building. I didn't answer, because I understood. We weren't lost. The space had changed. The building was larger inside than it had any right to be. The corridor hadn't turned. It had stretched, multiplied, folded into itself. Maria raised a trembling hand and pointed to a door on the right. There's a window, she whispered. I can see light. Maybe we can get out. We rushed inside. The room was small, bare, one window facing the village street. Outside, houses, snow, gray sky, normal. Too normal. Mark stepped to the window, grabbed the frame, tried to pull it open. It didn't move. Not stuck. Not swollen from moisture. Immovable, as if it had fused into the wall. He struck the glass with his elbow. Hard. The sound was dull. Wrong. The glass didn't crack, didn't tremble. He hit it again, harder, putting his weight into it. Nothing. No fracture, no vibration. The surface remained perfectly smooth, cold. I stepped closer, looked at the glass more carefully. There was no reflection, no distortion, no faint shimmer of light across it. And then I saw what shouldn't have been there. The snow outside wasn't moving, not drifting, not settling. It hung in the air, each flake suspended, perfectly still. The trees did not sway. The smoke from the distant chimneys did not rise. It froze in midair like pale threads. And the sky was too close, too flat, like paint. And slowly, very slowly, the houses outside began to blur, not fade, not disappear. They softened at the edges, as if something were erasing them from the inside outward. Behind the glass, the village wasn't empty, it was hollow. And in that sky, something was hanging, huge, impossible. It did not float, it occupied the air, a glowing mass of shifting shape, not fixed, not stable. It folded into itself, unfolded, swelled, contracted. I didn't know what to compare it to. A jellyfish, a tumor, an exposed organ suspended above the world. Its color was a sickly green, dim, diseased, pulsing, not with light, with something deeper, something internal. From it extended tendrils, dozens, hundreds, long thin filaments twisting downward toward the village. They did not fall. They reached. Some touched rooftops. Some slipped through broken ceilings. Some passed directly into the houses, as if the entire village were being fed on, or held, or grown. I tried to focus on its outline, but there was no outline. Every time my mind tried to define its shape, it changed. Curved where it should not curve. Bent inward where space should be empty. My thoughts slid off it, would not anchor. My eyes began to ache. Not from brightness, from wrongness. As if I were looking at something the human eye was never meant to resolve. A low hum filled my head. Not heard, felt. A vibration beneath thought. Inside bone. Inside teeth. It did not come from outside. It resonated from everywhere at once. And in that moment, I understood. The village wasn't abandoned. It was occupied. Mark staggered back from the window. He stumbled, fell hard onto the floor, his face drained of color, not pale but bluish. "What is that?" he forced out. "What is that?" I had no answer. There were no words large enough for it. Maria covered her eyes with both hands, pressed herself against the wall, then slid down to the floor. Her lips were moving, not steady, not coherent. A prayer, maybe, or just fragments of thought trying not to break apart. "I want to go home," she whispered. "I want to leave. Please, please." The hum in my head was growing, low, vibrating behind the eyes. I tore my gaze away from the sky. It felt like peeling something out of my skull. I turned toward the door. "We're leaving," I said. "Don't look at the windows." We rushed back into the corridor. Ran. Now the doors blurred past faster than before. Too fast. As if the building itself were urging us forward, hurting us. I didn't look directly, but in the corners of my vision, some rooms were lit, a faint green glow. Not from the outside, from within. In other doorways, shadows moved, tall, elongated, wrong, not aligned with any visible source of light. They stretched across ceilings, bent around corners, paused when we passed, then resumed. I didn't stop, didn't turn my head, just ran, dragging Maria by the hand, hearing Mark's heavy breathing behind me. And beneath it all, the sound again, a soft, careful step, matching our pace, not chasing, not rushing, just following, patient. The exit appeared suddenly, a door, wide open, daylight beyond it. We burst through without thinking, stumbled over the threshold, hit the ground hard, cold earth, air in my lungs again. I scrambled up, turned, helped Maria, pulled Mark to his feet. We were outside, standing in the village street, the same houses, gray sky overhead, empty, normal. No green glow, no impossible sky thing. I looked back at the building we had run from. 2 stories, peeling yellow plaster, collapsed roof beams, broken windows. Just an abandoned school, nothing more. But something was wrong. The village, it had changed. The houses were no longer in 2 rows. There were 3. No, 4. The street was not a single straight line anymore. It branched, split, wove into itself. Several streets intertwined into a crooked maze. I blinked. Some houses were familiar. Dark wooden Siberian cabins. Others were wrong. Walls leaned at impossible angles. Corners bent slightly inward. Doors too narrow or too tall. Some opened into blank walls. Some opened onto empty air. Windows were placed without pattern, one facing directly into another house, one embedded in the ground, one staring upward into the gray sky. Geometry no longer obeyed intention. The air felt thicker again, heavier, as if the village had inhaled and was holding it. Mark stood up slowly, brushed snow and dirt from his clothes. Behind us. The school door was gone. There was only a wall. "Where now?" Mark asked. I pointed toward the edge of the village. "Back. To the forest. Move." We walked fast at first, then faster, but the streets bent, folded, turned back into themselves. I tried to keep direction by instinct, by memory, by the sun. It didn't matter. The houses shifted, not violently, not abruptly, subtly, like pieces on a board being nudged when you weren't looking directly at them. We passed the same house again. Blue window frames, crooked gate, split fence posts leaning outward. I knew it. We had already passed it. Then again, and again. We were walking straight, but returning. Mark stopped, bent forward, hands on his knees, breathing hard. We're going in circles. No, I said. We're walking straight. The space is circling. He looked at me. What does that even mean? It's clothes, I said quietly. It folded in on itself. Maria stared at me, eyes wide and red from crying. How can space move? I didn't have time to answer, because then we heard it. Children's voices, soft, distant, singing, not from one direction, from everywhere, from behind houses, from rooftops, from beneath the ground. The melody was gentle, almost tender, a lullaby. The words were unfamiliar. Not Russian, not Yakut, not Evenki. Something older, throaty, with long drawn vowels, clicking consonants. The sound was beautiful, painfully beautiful. It pulled at something deep inside the chest, made you want to listen, to follow, to step toward it. The singing grew clearer, layered, as if dozens of children were singing in perfect harmony. No laughter, no breathing between verses, just the melody, endless. And beneath it, a faint vibration, the same low hum we had felt before. Only now, it matched the rhythm of the song. It was beautiful. That was the worst part. You wanted to listen, despite the fear, despite everything. Mark turned slowly, trying to locate the source. Maria pressed her palms over her ears. It didn't matter. The song passed through skin, through bone. It sounded inside the skull. Don't listen, I said. I covered my own ears. It made no difference. The melody grew louder, closer, more insistent. And then I saw them. At the far end of the street, 30 meters away, 5, 6, 10 small figures standing in a line, perfectly still. Old clothing, faded gray shirts, worn trousers, simple dresses, faces too distant to make out. They stood and sang, then one step forward, then another, then all of them, moving together, slow, synchronized, the song never breaking. Their movements were wrong, mechanical, puppet-like, arms hanging straight at their sides, heads slightly tilted downward, small, quick steps, too precise. I grabbed Mark's sleeve. Run! We ran. The streets blurred, houses smeared into shapes. The singing followed, never fading, never falling behind. I heard footsteps behind us, small, rapid, many. I glanced back. There were more of them now, 20, 30, 50, 100. They ran without changing pace, without breathing harder, always the same distance behind us. And now I could see their faces. They had faces, but empty, smooth, like mannequins. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just pale ovals of skin. And still, the singing came from them. I could see it, not from mouths, from the figures themselves. Maria screamed, stumbled. I caught her, pulled her up. Mark ran beside us, his face twisted with terror. Ahead, the edge of the village, the forest, trees. Escape. I pushed harder. Mark and Maria beside me. 10 meters. 5. And the singing shifted. Not behind us anymore. In front. And suddenly, we were back in the center of the village, right in front of the school. Mark let out a raw, broken shout and slammed his fist against the wall of a house. The sound echoed, hollow and wrong. Maria collapsed to her knees, sobbing. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the building. The children were gone. The singing had stopped. The village had frozen into silence. I helped Maria to her feet. She was shaking, wiping her face with the sleeve of her jacket. "We're not getting out," she whispered. "We're never getting out." "We will," I said, not believing my own voice. "There has to be a way." Mark was staring at the school. Then slowly he spoke. "There was another door. When we ran out, I saw it. Stairs going down. To a basement." "Why would we go into a basement?" Maria asked, her voice thin and brittle. "I don't know," Mark answered. "But upstairs, there was nothing. Maybe down there, there's something. An answer. An exit. Anything." I looked around at the village, the streets folding into themselves, the houses shifting, changing places as if breathing, the sky, gray, dull, and beneath that gray veil, a faint, sickly green glow pulsing somewhere beyond sight. The same glow, the same presence, watching. I nodded. "Let's go." And we turned back toward the school. Inside it was dark and silent. The corridor was normal now. The right length, the right number of doors. The staircase down was easy to find. Narrow, steep, the wooden steps eaten by time and damp. Mark went first, shining his flashlight. At the bottom, a short corridor and an iron door. Rust clung to its hinges, paint peeled in flakes. He pushed. The door opened with a long metallic groan, the sound echoing through the underground space. The basement was large, 10 meters by 10. Low ceiling, packed earth floor, cold, wet, the air thick with the smell of soil and mold. Metal shelves lined the walls, jars, boxes, tools, all rusted, all webbed over with years of neglect. In the center stood a heavy oak table, massive, solid, unmoved by time. On it, papers stacked neatly, as if someone had left them, waiting. Mark stepped forward, took the top sheet. I leaned over his shoulder, raised my own light. It wasn't a map, not a geographical one. Circles, different sizes, connected by lines, each circle labeled. Some in Cyrillic, some in Latin, some in symbols I did not recognize. One small circle, labeled in Russian, "Our World." From it, a thick black line led to a larger circle, unnamed. And from that one spread dozens of thin lines, branching outward into countless other circles until the entire page was consumed by connections. Mark turned the sheet over. On the back, handwriting, uneven, black ink. Some words smeared as if the writer's hand had shaken or been interrupted. August 15th, 1983. The borders between worlds are thinner than we believed. There are places, nodes, where space touches itself, overlaps, presses through. Dead Spring is one of them. We did not know this when we built the village. We learned later, when the strangeness began. First, small things disappeared. Tools, utensils, boots left by the door. Then animals. Then the children began to speak about voices. Voices calling them to come and play in the forest. We did not believe them. We scolded them, told them to stop inventing stories. Then the adults heard it. Singing, beautiful, gentle, irresistible. Those who listened too long began to change. They would walk into the forest and never return, or return different, quiet, empty, as if something inside them had been carefully removed. We tried to close the passage. We found old writings from a shaman who lived here before us. He knew about the node. He warned not to settle here. We did not listen. He left instructions, a circle, a stone, symbols. We performed the rite. It did not close. They would not allow it to close. They want the passage open. They call. They are calling us still. The children left first, all of them, in one night. We found their footprints leading into the forest. We did not find the children. Then the adults began to leave, one by one, two at a time. By the end of the week, there were 20 of us, then 10, then only me. The boundaries are dissolving. Our world and that world are blending here. The village stands in both worlds at once. Soon there will be neither ours nor theirs. Only the node, a loop, a place that folds back into itself. No exit. If you are reading this, leave immediately. Do not search deeper. Do not follow the singing. It lies. It promises. It does not give. There's no way out through the node. There is only... The sentence ends there, the final word smeared, as if the writer's hand trembled, or as if something stood behind him while he was writing. I examined the basement more carefully. The walls were solid, brick, unbroken, no cracks, no openings. And yet, in the far corner, behind the metal shelving, the darkness was different. Not just the absence of light, it felt thicker, denser, as if the wall did not end there. I stepped closer, gripped the edge of the shelving unit, pulled. Metal scraped across concrete with a long, dragging scream. Far too loud for a place like that. And behind it, there was a hole. Low, narrow, cut deep into the wall. The edges were lined with old stones carefully placed. Moss clung to them. This was not damage. It was an entrance, made deliberately. Long ago. Tunnel, I said quietly. It leads somewhere. Mark moved beside me and shone his flashlight inside. The beam revealed packed earth walls, an uneven ceiling, 5 meters of visible passage. Beyond that, nothing. The darkness swallowed the light. Maybe it's an exit, Mark said. Or a trap, Maria answered. We didn't know, but upstairs we had already found nothing. Only repeating streets, shifting houses, space folding in on itself. I looked down at the map of circles and lines, and I remembered the warning. Do not search for deeper paths. I held my breath, but we had no other choice. Let's go. If anything feels wrong, we turned back immediately. I crawled in first. The tunnel was low. At first I had to crouch, then drop to all fours. The walls were damp, cold, packed earth mixed with stone. The air was thick, wet. It smelled of mold and something else, something faintly sweet, heavy. We moved slowly. Our flashlights carved narrow blades of light through the dark, and the darkness closed in behind them. I counted the meters. 10, pause, 20, 30. The tunnel did not end. Sometimes it widened, offering false relief. Then it narrowed again, so tight our shoulders barely fit. Twice we had to exhale fully just to squeeze through. The silence deepened. Then the passage began to slope downward. Steeply, we slipped, grabbed at exposed roots, clawed at stone. And that's when I noticed it. The earth beneath my hands was warm. At first, barely, then unmistakably. The deeper we went, the warmer it became. Not like sunlight, not like fire, like something beneath the ground was alive and breathing. At last, the tunnel leveled out and opened into a cavern, small, no more than 5 meters across, the ceiling low enough to press the air downward. The air itself felt thick, heavy, hard to draw into the lungs. And in the center, there was a circle, the same circle, but not drawn in chalk like in the classroom above. This one glowed, not brightly, not violently, a soft bluish phosphorescence, as if the stone itself remembered light. The symbols were identical, but here they were carved deep, burned into the rock, their grooves filled with a faint internal glow. Alive. In the center of the circle lay a stone, larger than the one upstairs, and on the stone, a human skull, old, yellowed. Around it, bones arranged with deliberate precision, ribs, vertebrae, long bones of arms and legs, disassembled, laid out in order, not scattered, placed like a diagram. Maria inhaled sharply and covered her mouth. Mark stepped closer, lowering the flashlight beam. "It's old. 50 years, maybe more," he said. His voice echoed strangely in the confined space. "A shaman, probably. The one who knew." I moved toward the edge of the circle. The light did not flicker. It pulsed, barely, like breathing. And then I heard it again, that low hum, the same sound we had heard in the village. But here it was stronger, cleaner. It didn't just reach my ears. It moved through bone, through teeth, through the spine. "This is the point," I said quietly. "The anchor. This is where the knot converges." Mark swallowed. "So what do we do?" I remembered the words from the basement record. We tried to close the passage, but they would not let us close it. I stood there listening to the hum, and something shifted in my understanding. What if it was never meant to be closed? What if the circle was not a lock, but a switch? What if it did not seal the knot, but redirected it? The symbols were not letters. They were pathways, connections, like a circuit. And the stone was the conductor. The hum deepened, slow, patient, as if it had been waiting for someone to understand. And in that moment, I realized something worse. The circle was not just there to contain the knot. It was there to operate it. I stepped into the center, not out of fear, not out of desperation, because I understood. The symbols were not decoration. They were directions, connections, routes. And I was standing at the convergence. The moment my foot crossed the inner line, the light did not simply flare, it answered. The symbols ignited from beneath the stone, not upward but inward, as if the ground itself had opened an eye. The hum deepened, not louder, deeper. It vibrated through my ribs, through my teeth, through the marrow of my bones. The air tightened around me. The skull at the center seemed to tilt, not moving, but aligning. The circuit was complete. I did not lose balance. The earth did not fall away. Instead, the world separated, layer by layer, like sheets of glass sliding apart. I saw the village, not one village, many, alive, smoke rising, voices in the streets, abandoned, roofs collapsed, windows hollow, and the other one, the one beneath. Above it hung the green entity, not floating, anchored, its surface translucent and veined, pulsing slowly like an exposed organ. From it extended hundreds of tendrils, not attacking, not striking, but connecting, threading into rooftops, into ground, into the very air, into other horizons beyond sight. Each tendril was a path, each path a world, and the circle beneath my feet was one of its nodes. I understood then, it was not a monster, it was a system, a network, and I had just altered a connection. I heard Maria scream. Mark's voice, stretched, distorted, as if dragged through water. But their sounds were already distant, already displaced. The layers continued to peel back. Color drained, sound thinned. The green glow dimmed to a filament. And then, there was no village, no cave, no entity, only a narrowing point of perception. And then, silence. Total. Absolute. Darkness. Then I opened my eyes. Above me, a gray sky, ordinary, low clouds drifting slowly. Snow was falling, large, heavy flakes. I was lying on my back, in the snow, in the taiga. Cedars surrounded me, familiar ones. I pushed myself up, looked around. No village, no school building, no tunnel, just forest. I jumped to my feet. Mark! Maria! Silence, only wind moving through the treetops. I shouted again, louder, ran across the clearing, looked behind the trees. Nothing. I was alone. I checked myself. My backpack was still on me, but lighter. My jacket torn at the side. My hands scraped, my face aching. I ran my hands over my ribs, my legs. Nothing broken, just bruises, cuts. I looked at the sun, low in the west. Daytime. But which day? How long had I been gone? I pulled the compass from my pocket. The needle held steady. North. No shaking. No distortion. It worked. I oriented myself. The settlement lay west. 20 kilometers, maybe more. I started walking. I walked for 3 days. No food, no map, no supplies. I ate snow, chewed bark, scraped lichen from trees, slept beneath branches beside small fires made from my last matches. My legs burned. My boots came apart. My hands went numb from cold. But I kept walking. On the third day I reached the clearing, saw people, a search party. They were looking for us. They found me, and they brought me back to the settlement. Goran listened without interrupting, didn't blink, didn't shift in his chair. When Daniel finished, the room felt smaller somehow. The investigator slowly set his pen down on the desk. The soft click sounded louder than it should have. He leaned back, studied Daniel. A long silence stretched between them. Daniel nodded once. "I understand how this sounds," he said quietly, "like the ramblings of a madman." A pause. "But it's true. Every word." Goran's eyes didn't soften. "Where are Mark and Maria?" The question landed heavy. Daniel's gaze drifted past him, to the wall, to nothing. "I don't know." Another breath. "They're there, or here, or nowhere, or everywhere at once." His voice thinned. "I don't know." Silence again. Outside the window, wind scraped snow along the glass. Goran straightened. "We'll send a group to Dead Spring," he said at last. "We'll verify your story." He gathered the papers into a neat stack. "You, Daniel, go home. Rest." A slight pause. "Maybe you'll remember something else." The room felt colder than before. Daniel returned to his ranger's cabin. The house stood at the edge of the settlement. Low, dark, smelling of smoke and old wood. Everything was where it should be. The stove, the table, the narrow bed, his boots by the door. The world looked normal. He did not. He lay down, but sleep would not come. Each time he closed his eyes, faces rose in the dark. Maria, pale, eyes wide, on the edge of breaking. Mark, frozen between disbelief and terror. They were there. He was here. The imbalance burned inside him. It felt wrong, like an equation that had resolved incorrectly, like the system had released him by mistake. The night stretched, and then something shifted. He did not fall asleep, but images began to ignite behind his eyes. 3 diagonal cuts on cedar bark, the chalk circle in the classroom, the map of circles and connecting lines, the child's drawing, the thing in the sky, layered, veined, semi-translucent, pulsing, sickly green, with hundreds of filament-like tendrils reaching outward. The phrases from the basement. "The boundaries are thinner than we thought." A node, circle, stone, symbols, fragments, dates, ink smeared mid-sentence. The symbols began to move in his mind. At first, chaotic, then rhythmic, like someone turning a combination lock. He sat up sharply. They were not letters. They were not mystical signs. They were directions, vectors, connections. The tendrils in the sky were not limbs. They were lines from the map, a network. Each circle, a world. Each tendril, a connection. The village, a node of intersection. When he stepped into the circle, he had not escaped. The system had balanced itself. One exchanged for two. He exited. They remained. Not cruelty. Mechanism. If there is an entrance, there must be an exit. If there is a code, it can be reproduced. He remembered the child's drawing, the villagers reaching upward, smiling. They weren't resisting. They were aligning. The shaman tried to close the node. That was the mistake. You don't shut down a network. You reroute it. The symbols rearranged themselves in his mind. 3 diagonal cuts, not a mark, a pulse, a repeating interval, the rhythm of the forest. He rose before dawn, spread paper across the table, drew the circle, the angled signs, the branching map. And then he understood something else. The tendrils in the sky did not touch randomly. They converged at a single anchor point, the cave, the stabilizing stone, the physical node. The village had been an overlay, a projection across intersecting states. The cave was permanent, and the node had recognized him. It had logged his presence. He was part of the structure now. He returned alone. No police, no explanations. At the clearing there was no village, no school, no trace, only forest. He did not search for buildings. He searched for rhythm. The 3 diagonal marks appeared again, not everywhere, only where the air felt denser. He followed them. 100 steps, 150, like pulses. The compass trembled. The low hum returned. Above the clearing, a faint green shimmer. He did not look directly. He watched the shadows. The tendrils did not hang randomly. They touched specific points. One of those points lay just beyond the edge of the field. The ground there was soft, warm, vibrating. He dug with his hands. Stone, moss-covered edges, an opening, the tunnel. No school above it now, because the school had existed only an overlay. The cave was the true anchor. He descended. The deeper he went, the warmer it became. The hum intensified. When he entered the cave, the circle was already glowing, blue-white, waiting. The large stone lay in the center. No skull, no bones. The system had reset. He understood the process now. He understood the process now, not instinct, not panic, structure. He placed his left palm flat against the anchor stone. The surface was warm, alive. The vibration moved through him, not against his pulse, but into it, aligned. Then he lifted his right hand, not trembling, not guessing, precise. He traced the symbols in the air, not as drawings, not as superstition, as vectors, each motion deliberate, directional, connected. First, 3 diagonal strokes, slow, measured, cutting downward through space at the same angle as the forest markings. Entry alignment, the air tightened. Then a crossing line, intersecting the invisible diagonals, marking the point of overlap, world touching world. The hum deepened, not louder, deeper, layered. Then a curved motion, clockwise, a redirection arc, not opening, rerouting. The circle brightened beneath his feet. The glow intensified, pale blue turning almost white. Above him, beyond the ceiling of a stone and earth, something shifted. The green presence, the vast suspended structure. Its tendrils were not limbs. They were conduits, channels, and one of them, just one, responded. He completed the next motion, a sharp horizontal line, a break, a sever, not closing the node, isolating a branch. The light flared. The hum fractured into multiple frequencies at once, and the space before him did not open. It folded, like fabric pulled too tight and suddenly parted at the seam. A vertical tear formed, thin, trembling. Reality bent outward, not breaking, but peeling aside. Through the opening he saw it, the village, not abandoned, not empty, twisted, buildings leaning at impossible angles, shadows falling in wrong directions. And above, the green sky, pulsing, watching, waiting. And them, Maria and Mark, walking slowly, suspended between states, not dead, not alive, held inside an adjacent branch of the node. He understood. The structure had not imprisoned them out of malice. It had balanced exchange. He had left. 2 had remained. Now he was interrupting the equation. The green light intensified. The tendrils descended lower. The system had detected correction. He stepped through the fold. Not fully, just enough to reach them. He seized Maria's wrist first. Her skin was cold, but solid. Then Mark's jacket. As he held them both, he began the reversal. Not a new pattern. The same sequence, but backward. Horizontal break. First, undo isolation. Counter arc. Counterclockwise. Return flow. Intersection release. Dissolve overlap. 3 diagonal strokes. Upward this time. Exit vector. The air convulsed. The hum peaked, then fractured. The green sky above them shuddered. The tendrils recoiled violently, retracting as if burned. The fold behind Daniel narrowed. He shouted only one word, "Now!" The final gesture, a vertical downward cut, final break. The fold snapped shut, not fading, not dissolving, snapping, as if a membrane had sealed. The green sky vanished. The village collapsed into absence, and gravity returned. They woke in the taiga, all 3 of them. No village, no cave, no tunnel. Only forest. Cold. Silent. Real. Maria cried quietly, her shoulders shaking in small, exhausted tremors. Mark sat in the snow, staring at his hands as if expecting them to flicker, to blur, to disappear. Daniel reached for his pocket. Nothing. No compass. The sky above them was an ordinary winter gray. Flat, harmless, empty. But on the horizon, just for a fraction of a second, a faint green pulse shimmered through the clouds, soft, distant, watching. Then it was gone. Wind moved through the treetops. And then, voices, human voices, sharp, real, cutting through the silence. Branches cracked somewhere beyond the clearing. Boots in snow, a radio crackling. "Over here!" Shapes emerged between the trees. Heavy winter jackets, reflective strips, fur-lined hats. A rescue team pushing through the brush. One man lowered binoculars slowly. Another spoke into a radio, voice unsteady. 3 found. Alive. The rescuers stopped a few meters away, stunned. Snow fell between them, drifting in the space like ash. They saw 3 exhausted hikers. They did not see the seam that had just closed. Maria sobbed harder when the first rescuer reached her. Mark blinked as if waking from anesthesia. Daniel did not move. He kept his eyes on the horizon, waiting. The clouds stayed gray. The forest stayed silent. And reality, patient, indifferent, settled back into place. Dear friends, if you enjoy the stories on our channel, please consider subscribing. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming stories and new releases. Your support truly means a lot and helps the channel grow and continue creating. Thank you very much for watching.